That voice, it's such
Many
inspiring.
people are muted. You need to mute
Yes,
people.
let's mute everyone. Um, bear with me 1 second. This is the Bridget Knack translation of the current count of the soul verse. Devoted to the Spirit's revelation, I gain the light of cosmic being. Thought power grows and clarifies to give myself to me. And awakening comes forth from thinker's might, my sense of self. Welcome, Andrew. I think we've eaten up enough time. I'd like to give it all to you. Um, take it over.
Andrew's muted.
Oh, Andrew, let me. I think it's considered good form to have the speaker unmute himself.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be part of these Holy Night events. And thank you, Walter, and this New York City branch for putting this program together. For you, the task of starting off 2026 has fallen to me, a Bostonian. Just kidding. So I hope with your support to properly fulfill this task. My talk tonight takes its start with the line from Ezekiel 37. It goes, "And the two shall become one in thine hand." Prophecy was an important part of the ancient world. Direct spiritual experience was fading at that time. Even the mystery centers were fading away. People felt abandoned by the things from whence they came. Their prophets, however, gave them hope for the future. In this 6th century painting, we see two boys, both about 12 years old. They each have a halo or aura in which that of Christ is interpenetrating with both. In pre Ezekiel times, that is before the 6th century BC, one was part of a tribe. Each tribe was led by a high priest who could converse with their folk spirit that they felt was their God. Specifically, trained individuals develop the ability to see into the future. These prophecies help to guide the people. There were a number of biblical prophets. Other peoples, likely all peoples, had their prophets. We know as prophets the Mesopotamian Ensi, the Sumerian priests, the Islamic prophets Hud and Salih, and some within the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The meaning of this passage from Ezekiel 37, "and the two became one," is said to be symbolic instructions given to Ezekiel to place two sticks in his hands and that these would be made into one. The sticks have been interpreted by scholars to represent the northern and southern Israeli kingdoms. Becoming one stick is claimed to be a prophecy for the restoration of Israel as a single unified nation under one king, David. Now, before becoming king, David was but a shepherd boy within the house of Jesse. The prophet Samuel saw in him this role to be this unification king. Of David's sons, Nathan becomes high priest, while Solomon becomes king. From these two lineages of Nathan and Solomon come the two Josephs mentioned in Luke and in Matthew. Each gospel describes a nativity where in Luke shepherds come, while in Matthew it is kings, suggestive that the Nathan lineage could represent Abel, while the Solomon lineage could represent Cain. This suggestion gained support when Luke lets us know that Joseph is actually not the father. And remember, Abel was killed. But the Luke Jesus is fatherless. Luke traces ancestry back through its fathers to Seth, who was the son of Adam, who was the motherless son of God. The ancient mystery centers were once everywhere upon the earth. Every culture was guided by their own mystery center that was at the heart of each tribal society. One can trace the evolution of consciousness through the cultural ages following the Great Flood. Once in ancient Greece, man was not yet independent. He did not feel as an individual, but as a member of a city-state. I am an Athenian or a Spartan. With individuals developing intelligence, then the independent individual finally emerged in Roman times. Remember, public education of children only began in the 17th century. And Boston Latin School was the first such school in the Americas in 1635. Despite Augustine's words that they, or those of the ancient mysteries, were Christian before the term came into existence. Think about that. Augustine in the 4th century is saying that those who were part of the mystery centers were Christian before the term came into existence. So, but at this time in the 4th century, many in Christianity saw these ancient mysteries as their rival. The destruction of the ancient mysteries happened within the Roman Empire and happened towards the end of the 6th century. Now, Emperor Constantine sought harmony within his empire, but he had a boisterous theological disagreements within the Christian community itself. In hoping to bring peace, he sought to homogenize Christianity. He called on Christian leaders to work out their differences according to Roman law, that is, majority rules. On theological issues, thus, the Nicene Council was held in 325. Many more ecumenical councils were to follow. Formally, one labeled a heretic was merely excommunicated and sent into exile. But now, with Roman law backing them, so-called heretics were exterminated. Then came Justinian, right around the beginning of the 6th century. And he hated these ancient mysteries. He destroyed all mystery streams in temples. He even closed in 529 the school of Athens that had been set up by St. Paul. Many felt that the Justinian plague from 541 to 543, when 100 million people died, that this was God's punishment for such deeds. The books and records of heretics and mystics were largely destroyed in this period. A dark age indeed ensued. Luckily, beginning in the 20th century, A number of such ancient texts have been discovered. In Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945, in an earthen jar, many Gnostic texts were found. These Gnostic texts describe a Messiah of Israel and a Messiah of David. Both were expected. These are labeled as priestly and kingly. Later, in Elminya, Egypt, the Gnostic Gospel of Judas was found. Its translation became available only in 2006, and scholars remarked that it has elements of theology unlike Christianity of today. For our lecture tonight, the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered first in 1947, and there were continued to be found until 1979 in 11 caves. You can see a picture here of them, are important. Qumran was an Essene community. 872 scrolls written in Hebrew and Aramaic by their initiates have been found. These were written beginning about 150 BCE and continue to be written up to 70 AD, when the Roman army dispersed all Jews, including the Essenes, from Palestine. The Pistis Sophia is a Gnostic text said to be discovered in 1773. But as we shall see, apparently Leonardo and his students already knew about this text that refers to twin messiahs and two families. Here is a passage from the Pistis Sophia, quote, "When thou wast small, before the Spirit came upon thee, while thou wast in the vineyard with Joseph, this Spirit came forth from the height. He came to me into my house. He resembled thee. And since I did not recognize him, I thought that he was thou." Interesting. "And the Spirit said to me, Where is Jesus, my brother, that I meet him? And when he said these things to me, I was confused, and I thought that he was a phantom sent to tempt me. So I bound him to the leg of the bed in my house and came out to you in the field, thou and Joseph," because she's speaking to Jesus, her son Jesus. "And I found you in the vineyard as Joseph was hedging the vineyard with reeds. Now it happened, when thou didst hear me speaking the word to Joseph, thou didst understand the word, and thou didst rejoice, and thou didst say, Where is he that I may see him? But it happened, when Joseph heard thee saying these words, he was agitated, and we all came up at the same time. We went into the house, we found the Spirit, and we looked at thee with him. We found thee like him, and the Spirit was released. He embraced thee, he kissed thee, and thou also didst kiss him, and you became one." In summary of these prophecies, the Damascus document from the Dead Sea Scrolls refers to two Messiah children, one from Aaron, priestly, and one from Israel, kingly. And it also references the importance of a baptism. From Kabbalistic roots, the book of Zohar states, another Messiah, the son of Joseph, will unite himself with the Messiah, the son of David. But the son of Joseph will not remain in life. He will be killed and will become alive again when the little hill, the skull, receives life upon the great hill, Golgotha. Of course, those are my interpretations. The Pistis Sophia even spoke about a spiritual merging of two Jesus boys. And from the Old Testament, Zechariah, These are the two anointed ones. Anointed means Messiah, that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. In Numbers, there shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. So we get the star, the shepherd, and the scepter, the kingly. And we already heard from Ezekiel. So we find the prophets expected two births, two messiahs, a later merging and a baptism where the Holy Spirit would settle upon the body. This brings us to the need to explore the history of this festival we've been celebrating, Christmas. Why is Christmas set for December 25th? One might reason that since historian Africanus wrote in the year 200 AD that this conception of Jesus happened on the 25th, thus 200 days later, the birth would happen, thus on the 25th of December. But none of the Gospels offer a date for the birth of Jesus. Perhaps surprisingly, early Christianity never celebrated Christmas. In those first centuries, it was Easter that was important. Already in the Roman Empire, there was a festival of the rebirth of the sun god. It was 3 days after the winter solstice. One could not tell that the days were getting longer at those times until the evening of the second day after the solstice. So, in 274, on December 25th, the temple to Sol Invictus, meaning the unconquered sun god, was dedicated in Rome by Emperor Aurelian. Later, when Constantine allowed Christianity to be a religion of Rome, that was in 313 AD, he thought Sol Invictus was the same as Christ, that the sun god had come to earth as expected by the mysteries. 352 AD was the first known date that Christmas was celebrated anywhere in the world. And it spread 2 years later in 354 was the first celebration of Christmas in Rome. Still, Christmas did not become a major festival until the 9th century. Christianity in the East celebrated the baptism on January 6th as the birth of Christ. Note I said the birth of Christ, not the birth of Jesus. Originally, the text of the baptism in Luke, and possibly the other Gospels as well, said, "On this day I have begotten thee." Today it says, "In whom I am well pleased." Artists depicted the Spirit of Christ as a dove released by the hands of God to descend and remain upon Jesus of Nazareth. According to early Christianity, after 3 years, Christ could penetrate this body even into the bones. And thus, when he experienced death and his bones were not broken, he fully became man. What do we know about the birth of Jesus? Here is Filippo Lippi's offering done in 1463. And with the view that Jesus was born as God in a human body. This remains the prevalent view today. He used the symbols normally used in scenes of the baptism to show the dove descending to Jesus. With this view, the significance of the baptism lost its meaning. And note Joseph sleeping and John the Baptist depicted as a 12-year-old and in the background. As the outer power of Christianity increased, the inner understanding of the Christ mystery decreased, and the festival of the 6th of January ceased to have any essential meaning. The birth of Christ was placed 13 days earlier and envisaged as coincident with the birth of Jesus. But although the error would seem to point to the loss of a great truth, actually profound meaning lay behind it. Although the men responsible knew nothing of it, we cannot but marvel at the subconscious wisdom with which the festival of Christmas Day was instituted. It was known to seers that spiritual vision penetrated most deeply during the 13 holy nights following the winter solstice. These visions during the 13 nights are crowned on the 6th of January by the Christ imagination. Early Christianity had multiple leaders who had different perspectives on its theology. There were 5 main sees: Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, Rome, and Constantinople. All looked to the 3 years from baptism to ascension. None of them had any interest in establishing a festival for the birth of Jesus, the man. But it did become important later as materialism permeated Christianity. Arius, who you see here, was one of these early Christian leaders. He held that Jesus was a man and Christ was the Son God who was subordinate to the Father God. At this time, there was significant theological debate concerning the Holy Trinity. Interestingly, Arius's bishop Wulfila Christianized the Goths, and the Goths had no word for I. How was Wulfila to translate "I am the light of the world"? He took the letters from Jesus Christ to form a new German word and concept, Ich, I-C-H. Note that a child does not use the word I until about the age of 3. Interestingly, Christ would truly be a human being only after 3 years within the sheaths of Jesus of Nazareth. Constantine had an interesting relationship to Christianity, which he tolerated, but did not become a Christian until on his deathbed. That is, according to legend. It was his mother, Helena, who was a Christian, and she influenced him. When Constantine became emperor in 324, he was appalled at all the theological bickering going on amongst all the different streams of Christianity within his empire. Enough, he proclaimed. He decreed that the many Christianities get together to settle their theological differences and settle them according to Roman law. Majority wins. The first council in 325 resulted in the Nicene Creed and in Arius being declared a heretic. After the Nicene Creed was established under Constantine, numerous other ecumenical councils followed to continue to homogenize the religion. As the theologians gathered in Nicaea in 325, his mother Helena was in the Holy Lands looking for evidence of Christ. It is said she found a grave and his burial clothes, perhaps the Shroud of Turin, as well as the true cross. I put that in quotes, whatever that meant. Perhaps because of this, Constantine sought to move the capital of the Roman Empire further to the east, that is, closer to the Holy Lands. This empire relationship played into the justification for the Crusades. Good thing it was moved, because Rome fell to the Gothic tribes in 476 AD. These Gothic tribes had been Christianized by followers of Arius, as you heard, and they had declared later to be heretics by these ecumenical councils. Charlemagne was also of a Gothic lineage, and so he and his people were Arian Christians. But Charlemagne becomes ordained by a pope to be the emperor of the newly established Holy Roman Empire. Well, that is, if he converts to Catholicism. By the 5th century, two of the sees, Rome and Constantinople, vied for theological supremacy. In 1054, this battle resulted in the Great Schism. At the heart of this split was the filioque. This phrase, "and from the Son," was added to the original Nicene Creed, leading to this schism. It seems silly today to argue so bitterly over whether the Holy Spirit came from just the Father or from both Father and Son. The ancient mysteries with their myths had foreseen the day when humans would be chained to the rock. But St. Augustine had said, as you heard, they were Christian before the term came into being. These same people who come up with these mythologies, why did he say such a thing? Because their whole purpose was to prepare for the coming of the Sun God. But in the mystery centers, only specially prepared people could be initiated into their mysteries. These centers were everywhere in the world. Their job was to bring their wisdom to their people in a way that they could understand. Hence the myths and fairy tales and parables. Christ's words, "I have yet many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now," indicates an evolution of consciousness. Christ had to speak in parables for the masses. Learning capabilities were much different back then. Myths and fairy tales were used as people learned through imaginative images and stories. One could remember word for word epics one heard only once. Individual intellect only begins in some parts of the world in the year 747 BC and continues to this day, continues to develop, that is. Before this time, humans were guided. Yes, angelic beings incarnated as humans to help bring about the next step in evolution. With an evolution of consciousness, then reincarnation does make sense. Why secrecy about this? Christianity came to redeem all of the ancient mysteries. Christianity came to consider or deem all of the ancient mysteries as heresies. Thus, in the 6th century, Justinian destroyed what was left of them, and their teachers fled to the east, Gandhi Shapur, to the remaining schools of Persia. Without reincarnation, we have to assume that people have always had the same capacities, but technology and culture have risen the starting point for later humans. And so we think, maybe we don't need to consider an evolution of consciousness because the starting point keeps moving. What else do we know about placing this Christmas festival on the 25th of December? Well, before Christianity, December 25th was a celebration for the rebirth of the sun, for the victory of the sun over darkness. On the evening of the 24th, the people knew that the days were getting longer and that the sun was again victorious over darkness. In Greek mythology, Helios was known as the sun god. He was beardless and drove his chariot across the heavens each day. In Persian lore, he was known as Ahura Mazda, and in Egyptian as Ra. Here we see the sun god depicted in pottery from ancient Greece. Was this behind the words, "I am the light of the world"? This mosaic of Christ as charioteer of the sun exists in a Christian tomb called Julii, which is in the Vatican necropolis, a catacomb in Rome. It is an example of early Christian art showing Christ as the unconquered sun god. Here is a mosaic found in the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, showing the four gospel writers and the icons associated with each. This was built in the 6th century. The feeling within this basilica is certainly quite different from the feeling in modern churches of today. We might claim this is due to our evolution of consciousness. If so, can this mood be rescued? Of our four Gospels, 2 begin with the baptism, while the other 2 give birth stories. The nativities are in Matthew and Luke. The 2 dates have been debated for the birth of Matthew's story. The great historian Josephus places Herod's death just after a lunar eclipse. Because such an eclipse occurred in 4 BC, it was the consensus for many years until in 1990, astronomer John Pratt showed there was an eclipse visible in the Palestinian region on the 29th of December in 1 BC. 29th of December, 1 BC. I find it interesting that Herod died soon after the slaughter of the innocents. Interestingly, just as the Pope and the French King Philip IV died soon after they massacred the Templar Knights in 1314. Luke's story is about shepherds, not kings. Luke, in chapter 1, offers a time frame when it mentions in the days of Herod. But chapter 1 is not about the birth of Jesus. Rather, it is about the birth of his mother, Mary. And then Luke does not mention King Herod again, nor does he mention a star, nor fleeing to Egypt, nor killing of babies that are central to Matthew's nativity. In Luke, the family is from Nazareth, north. They had to travel south to Bethlehem to register for a census and to pay their tax. In Matthew, Jesus is born in the family home in Bethlehem. Both of these frescoes by Giotto are near each other in the same cathedral. Here, in the Matthew story, we see an active Joseph with a dark beard, while here in the Luke story, we see a removed, sleeping Joseph. They do not appear to be the same man, and certainly not the same age, as I've zoomed in so you can see each Joseph up close. This chart outlines the differences between the birth stories of Matthew and of Luke. We've long assumed that there was one Jesus born as Jesus Christ. You can see a number of striking differences, though, here. Matthew's family is well off and had at least, that Jesus had at least 6 siblings. 6 siblings, while the single child in Luke was from a poor family. Even though it seems a bit of a stretch, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were all common names at that time. This mystical nativity by Sandro Botticelli in 1501, and that's an important year for you to remember, combines the kings of Matthew and the shepherds of Luke into one painting. The setting is a cave. That doesn't appear in the Gospels anyway, wherein they found shelter with the animals. 3 kings left and 2 shepherds right. Joseph is sleeping. Ox and ass are depicted. Interestingly, 12 archangels above, 3 archangels midway, and on the earth there are angels and demons everywhere. He has depicted the theme of the joining of heaven and earth that once belonged to the mystery upon Golgotha and to the mystery centers. Yes, even the demons celebrate, for now they too can be redeemed. While the Matthew family raced off to Egypt, the Luke family lingered in Bethlehem for a little over a week so that Jesus could be circumcised in the nearby temple of Jerusalem. Then they return home to Nazareth, to their Essene community. At that time, there were three Jewish sects: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the ascetic Essenes. The Dead Sea Scrolls come from the Essene community of Qumran. Out of fear of Herod and his offspring, the Matthew family will never return to their home, Bethlehem. Instead, they elect, for safety purposes, to move to an Essene community in Nazareth. According to Rudolf Steiner, they did not know of each other before they all settled there. There is much more to this story than we have time for, unfortunately. I was barely able to touch upon the numerous so-called heresies of early Christianity. Of course, there are a lot more, and it's a very interesting topic to go into. But now I must mention one such group, the Gnostic Christians. Typically, once a group was deemed to be heretical, all of its books were destroyed. Sometimes some books survived. One Gnostic text, and I mentioned it, the Pistis Sophia, was likely to be within the collection of ancient books brought to Italy during the early Renaissance. Because of an active inquisition, such Gnostic and other esoteric books were generally kept hidden. The Inquisition might use them as evidence that could lead to you being burned in the town center, just like Giordano Bruno was in the year 1600. The aim of the first real crusade was that Jerusalem, not Rome, should stand as the center and citadel of the Christian religion. This was, again, an attempt to make the ecclesia, the church, independent of world dominion. And here you see St. Francis, and he was part of the Fifth Crusade in 1219. And there's some very interesting stories about how he tried to Christianize the head of the Islamic forces. And then I should also mention the Cathars, because they were the recipients of the Albigensian Crusade. They had no army, they had no defense, they did not believe in any kind of killing of others. So they were easily rounded up by this set of mercenaries and killed. Most of you know that the spiritual world was closed to mankind in 1250. This was an intense and dangerous time in human evolution. Christian Rosenkreuz carried humanity through this period, as did the Knights Templars and the Cathars. It is very difficult to look at history and not ask God why so much suffering was allowed. Of course, humans questioning God is absurd, but for the development of our knowledge of good and evil, asking such questions are important. What might we say about the evils of the 20th century? Was this a fire initiation from evil? Is our consciousness continuing to evolve? Let's review the situation heading into the Renaissance. The mystery centers were gone for about 1,000 years. Theology was decided by Roman law. Being in a theological minority likely meant death. multiple Christianities had merged into either the Roman or the Orthodox, and these had split in 1054. The darkness of the Middle Ages and long-lasting wars, 100-year wars, plagues, and a corrupt clergy were the norm. Religion was still strong in society, but even religion was giving way to materialism. The Renaissance renewed culture and opened the doors for science. Thus, hope returned. Similar to Steiner, Leonardo da Vinci had to struggle mightily with revelation and discretion. Through reading the Akashic record, Steiner said of Leonardo that he was, in an earlier existence, a great initiate who had raised himself to a high knowledge of the spiritual world. But due to the state of the physical body in his time, such experiences could not come to full consciousness. A 15th century body could not bring to expression the inner thought, inner feeling, and inner power of execution that Leonardo had taken up into himself in earlier lives. Although Leonardo was always driven to seek for the spirit, he was repeatedly frustrated. Yet this impulse to seek for the Spirit still worked in a glorious and grand way in him. Yet his greatness was significantly held back by the opposition Leonardo faced. It is a maxim that all spiritual development must be met with resistance. Not only was there the Inquisition, but also a particular individual who saw it as his religious obligation to clear the air for the coming of New Jerusalem. This individual was Girolamo Savonarola, a Dominican friar and preacher. He arrived in Florence in 1482. Soon thereafter, he claimed divine guidance in calling for a Christian renewal. He denounced clerical corruption, despotic rule, and an exploitation of the poor. And for this, he gained a large following that he then turned on the ruling Medici. He instituted a puritanical campaign enlisting the active help of the Florentine youth to destroy all art that was intended for the vain. Foreseeing this, Leonardo left Florence for Milan. Savonarola eventually succeeded in exiling the Medici and gaining political control of Florence. But when he refused to have Florentine soldiers join a war against France, the Pope, in popular opinion, turned against him. Under torture, Savonarola confessed that he had invented his visions and prophecies. Thus, in 1498, he was burned in Florence. The Medici were then restored to power, and several of their children later became Pope. But the Medici cultural magic was gone, essentially at the time, 1492, when Lorenzo de' Medici died. We know that at the age of 28, Leonardo was already part of the Medici household. He also became a member of the Garden of San Marcos, where he had access to its library of esoteric content, as well as to garden walks with the leading philosophers of his time. There is an odd journal entry in his notebooks that says, "The Medici made me, and the Medici destroyed me." Could he be referring to the role the Medici had in bringing him to a form of initiation when the old me is destroyed and the new me is born again? Florence at this time was home to many secret schools, and Leonardo kept his private life secret. One school that we know existed, but of which we know little else, would be the Platonic Academy, headed by Marsilio Ficino. Its members we know about include philosopher Pico della Mirandola and Aristotelian John Argyropoulos. When Leonardo moved to Milan, he set up his academy based on what he knew from the Accademia Platonica in Florence. I have concluded that Leonardo was initiated in late 1481 or early 1482, just before he left for Milan. Let's look into my claim. The original hierophant of the Academia Platonica was Georg Gemistus Plethon, who I call the catalyst for the Renaissance. You see, in 1428, Byzantine Emperor John VIII was often consulting with Plethon, who is known as the wisest man of his empire. Emperor John wanted to reunite the churches of Rome and Constantinople that had split in 1054. He placed Plethon, a pagan, among the set of envoys that he sent in 1438 to that Council of Florence that hoped to heal the Great Schism. Because Plethon was a pagan, he was not allowed into the council. Instead, Plethon offered lectures in Florence. These were the spark that ignited the Renaissance. Cosimo de' Medici attended these lectures. Out of his excitement and inspiration, he founded the Accademia Platonica and placed his wisest man, Marsilio Ficino, as its head. Plethon was called a prince among the philosophers. He knew the works of Plato, Aristotle, Zoroaster, and all the great Greek, Persian, and Egyptian philosophers. He knew them as if he had been their student. Marsilio Ficino called him the second Plato. And Cardinal Bessarion of Florence, a cardinal, speculated as to whether Plato's soul occupied his body. Imagine how convincing Plethon was for a cardinal of the Catholic Church to wonder about reincarnation. Plethon also happened to bring a trunk full of books on esotericism, hermeticism, and magic. He allowed a Medici team to translate them from Greek to Latin. This was done primarily by Ficino. Finally, in 1440, Plethon returned to Greece to found a mystery center in the town that became known as Mistra. It's near Sparta. Clearly, he was a hierophant, meaning he could train one to become an initiate. I conjecture that Ficino was so trained to be Plethon's successor. Thus, later, Ficino initiated Leonardo when Leonardo was 29, becoming 30. Because such things were kept secret, there are no records. Now, I'll show you more why I think this. Leonardo was commissioned in 1481 to paint the Adoration of the Magi for a chapel in Florence. He was well along with this painting when he suddenly abandons it. This Adoration of the Magi was to have been his coming out masterpiece. It would have established Leonardo as the Florentine master. It was already, by the sketch you see here, unlike any adoration before. Just look at the soulful humanity being depicted. But Leonardo just walked away. Instead, he begins Virgin of the Rocks. Art historians have marveled at why. And when he left Florence for Milan early in 1482, he took all of his unfinished paintings with him, but not this adoration. Why? One explanation, in my conclusion, is that he received at this time an initiation into spiritual knowledge. And as you all know, initiation deeply changes an individual. I conclude that Leonardo here in his 30th year received such an initiation that so profoundly changed him that he knew he could no longer paint according to church dogma, but only according to truth, whatever that might mean to his safety. I sensed that the question, how was the nature of Christ related to the nature of Jesus? This question arose at this time for Leonardo, in part because it had been the question of early Christianity, as I tried to indicate earlier. I would like to further propose that Leonardo will speak through not only his paintings, but also those of his students. This speaking was not so much for his time, but for ours. Here is an example of one student, Bernardino Luini, revealing that the merger of the two Jesus boys occurred, or as the story is told in Luke's gospel, when its Jesus was left behind by its Mary and Joseph in Jerusalem when the boy was 12 years old. This painting is called Jesus Among the Doctors of the Temple. And look at what his hands are telling us. The two become one. Another example is this painting by Pinturicchio that showed how the two became one. By the way, I'm only showing paintings by Leonardo or his students. So here you see how the two became one being depicted. So I'll go into this a little deeper. Look at the hands here. The books of the learned doctors have been thrown on the ground, symbolic that their knowledge fades in the face of this 12-year-old boy. Note his halo with a red cross inscribed, indicating his divine destiny. Now notice the hand gestures. It says the two will become one. Next, we notice the feet. On our right, the child with the halo is standing on the earth, barefoot. On the left, both children's feet are lifted off the earth, one by socks, one by shoes. Of these two children, one is well-dressed, the other poorly dressed. Notice the colors of the well-dressed boy, his green and magenta top with gold undershirt. He has a blue-bound book in hand, while the other has a white sack with something inside that might be a book. They are departing. They represent the two Jesus children as they once were, but will no longer be. We see that these two boys are framed by 5 individuals. Their clothing colors go from left to right: black, blue, gold, green, and magenta. And in the 5th, a royal purple. Each of the 4 carry an object in their hand. These have not been tossed on the ground. The 4 facing the 2 children represent the physical soma, psyche, and pneuma. The 5th is the Hierophant, who performed the spiritual merging of these 2 within the Holy of the Holies. The result was the boy with the halo that we see again. The central characters are the Hierophant and the merged Jesus. Joseph and Mary, a pair, are entering from the right, and the former 2 Jesus boys are departing on the left. In Leonardo's own painting of John the Baptist, he chose the imp Salai, who both church and public officials thought to be an unredeemable delinquent, as the model for John the Baptist. The Gospels of Mark and John begin with the baptism, the birth of Christ into a human body. Leonardo is showing us he knows about the symbol of John the Baptist. So why didn't he put it in his Virgin of the Rocks? He knows it. Notice the finger gestures. The right hand pointing with one finger to the above, the left hand with two fingers touching the heart. His hands are expressing this theme of the two becoming one. And notice his smirk. Da Vinci was mocking the church. Perhaps through Platon, Leonardo understood how Christianity had fulfilled the ancient mysteries. Why did Leonardo and his students do extensive studies of kissing babies? Over 30 such paintings are known to exist that have ties to Leonardo or his academy students. Here we see one claimed to be a work by Leonardo, according to Stephen Holmes in his book, The Lost Leonardo. And this one is by Joost van Cleve, who became known as the Leonardo of the North. Joost and his students painted dozens of these kissing babies. Why would any artist of his time paint this scene over and over again, even without commission? I mean, most of them were without, probably all of them. More importantly, who is being depicted? Could they have been painting that scene from the Pistis Sophia that I read earlier, where the two boys kiss each other and then become one? Well, these boys are certainly not 12-year-olds. Did Leonardo use innocent babies for the kissing scene so as not to stir up anti-homosexual sentiment that he had to endure earlier in his life when police arrested him and a few other young men for nudity in the public arena, in a public park? Was the intent to depict non-sexual pre-puberty intimacy, this kissing scene? Or was this meant to be a foreshadowing of the destiny of these two boys and their later merging? The Holy Infant's embracing theme was used in several Madonna studies done by Leonardo's students. Here we see the Thulan Madonna by Marco d'Aggiano. Note her hand gestures. Her left hand is on the Book of Wisdom. What is her right hand doing? Take a moment to compare the Thulan Madonna to Leonardo's Virgin of the Rocks. You will notice the obvious similar head tilt. Pay attention to the hand gestures of the Madonna. In the Thulan, her left hand draws from the Book of Wisdom. In Virgin of the Rock, her right hand draws from the kneeling boy that she touches. Perhaps we are to assume that these are the same two boys and that they have switched places. If so, why might that be? Here we see a painting by Bernardino Luini. Today, but not then, this is entitled Holy Family with Infant John the Baptist. Compare her hand gestures. The Madonna's hands in Luini's painting serve no function except to point us to the Virgin of the Rock's central figure. Again, the tilt of the head is the same. Why did Luini mix the scenes from Virgin of the Rocks and Holy Infant's embracing? Was it so that we could figure out this mystery? Now I'd like you to compare Bernardino de Conti's Madonna painting to the original Virgin of the Rocks. We see Madonna's hands are reversed, and so are the two boys. This can only mean that the two children of Virgin of the Rocks are the same two children of Holy Infant's embracing, but on different sides. And de Conti is telling us that the central figure is bestowing wisdom to the child on the left from the Book of Wisdom. In Leonardo's painting, the bestowal is from the kneeling boy as the Book of Wisdom, through her to the sitting boy. By using the same background, de Conti was definitely trying to inform us that his painting reveals something important about his master's original Virgin of the Rocks. Again, De Conti, and we see these paintings speaking to each other. Here, De Conti risked the wrath of the Inquisition. The great art historian Carlo Pedretti showed this painting in an exhibit in Italy in 2005. It had been in the private collection and relatively unknown. After the showing, it returned to this private collection. Pedretti was excited to show this, but for whatever reason, it garnered little attention. Even Raphael must have been in on this secret. Here is his Madonna Terra Nuova from when he was 22 and begun when he was 19 or 20. But how could he have been in on this secret since Leonardo had left Florence before Raphael was even born? Well, due to war, Leonardo was back in Florence from 1501 to 1506. This painting was completed in 1505. The boy on the left is John the Baptist. The naked baby in Madonna's lap is Jesus. But here again, we have a third boy with a halo and royal robes on the right. Why couldn't these artists just come out and tell us who they have painted? Oh yeah, the Inquisition. Leonardo was commissioned to paint this second Virgin of the Rocks for the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception that resides in London in the National Gallery. You can easily see that Leonardo did not duplicate his original. While the original was a revelation of the sun, this copy, and there is a third, by the way, is a revelation using moonlight. Here we see the stone that was added after the painting was varnished. Yes, there was a long legal battle between the confraternity that would not accept this copy as it was. It did not fit church dogma. So after 5 years, again in Florence, Leonardo had to travel to Milan to do something about this legal problem. Since the varnish was already applied by Leonardo's partner, what could he do? Well, to settle the issue, Leonardo, in his brilliance, proposed to paint these required icons, that is, the halo and the staff, on top of the varnish with a new gold paint that either Leonardo had invented or somehow he knew about. He told the brethren that these would glitter in the candlelight of their chapel. The confraternity was pleased and agreed, and this is the result. Note that its bottom of the staff is hidden behind a flower, and it's rather awkward, but it's acceptable. Note also the flora here. Some of the flowers on the left have 6 petals, some 5. This is botanically incorrect. Leonardo thus did not paint the entirety of this copy, or he would never have made such a mistake. Let's wrap up with a focus on the 2 boys of the Virgin of the Rocks. I now want to briefly show you that Leonardo, with the help of his students, was able to show how Christ came for all of humanity. Their idea would have been considered a heresy at that time. From Steiner, we know that the stories of Matthew and Luke were 2 different streams. By the 4th century, Christian theology had merged their stories, overlooked the baptism, and placed the birth of Christ at the merger nativity on the 25th of December. Here are themes from the Matthew's nativity, and here are themes from Luke's nativity. As you see, I have further conjectured that these 2 boys represent Cain and Abel. These 2 streams needed to reach resolution by a free-willed merging, for the two streams had to become one for Christ to enter a human body for all of humanity. This story, if told solely by Leonardo, would certainly have led to a condemnation and death by the Inquisition. But by spreading the story out over so many paintings and painters, a mystery was revealed in plain sight that was yet invisible to the Inquisition. Sheer genius on the part of Leonardo. I'll sum this up with a quote from 2 Clement, verse 11. Quote, "For the Lord himself, being asked by one when his kingdom would come, replied, when two shall become one, that which is without as that which is within, and the male with the female, neither male nor female. Such fusion is the goal of our human evolution." Oh, I left one character unidentified. Sorry, I'll finish up in just a second. Leonardo was a lover of wisdom, of divine wisdom, of the Virgin Sophia. He taught his students through observation to seek Isis, that is the new Isis, the divine Sophia, whom we must find if the Christ power that is ours already, since the mystery of Golgotha is to become alive within us. Of the women at the cross, the name of the mother of Christ is not stated in John. Rudolf Steiner showed that the mother of Christ is Sophia. Now you know another secret of the Virgin of the Rocks. So, back to you, Walter.
Dumbfounded. There's so much there, Andrew, so extraordinary. Let's see, are you willing to take some questions?
I'm open to that. Or comments. They don't even have to be questions. It could be, I don't agree with you.
I have one comment, just as in my understanding of the intellectual soul age. The idea that someone had a wrong thought was needed to be punished was one of the characteristics of that age. One of the things that Owen Barfield said, when a new faculty is coming in, it's incredibly powerful. So I think it's something to keep in mind about how we see the intellectual soul age, that this was one of the characteristics of it.
Right.
That's all. It's just an observation. And
good addition. Thank you.
And when you go into the consciousness soul age, continuing to carry those values is already corruption.
Right. And somehow we know this, even though it might be hard to be conscious of it.
Well, when you look at The Crucible, for example, Arthur Miller's play of The Crucible, you know, again, you see the people being crushed by the stone of orthodoxy.
Right.
Okay. Questions, comments? Are you all dumbfounded like me, or come on, someone?
And Walter, there is a question about recording, and this is being recorded, so
Yes.
it'll be on the
Soon.
web. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. This is Tish. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the Cain and Abel streams, how they connect to the two Jesus children.
Well, that's a tough question to try to answer easily and quickly, but what I tried to show is that, well, let me say, as when we go back to this time, which would be Lemurian times, all of humanity was androgynous, and we have the streams of Eve and Adam. And as we start entering Earth, leaving the spiritual realm, then something changes. They bring forth something. And it should say Eve brings forth something. And Cain doesn't have Adam as a father, which is interesting. He has another Elohim as a father. And by coming first and having this fatherhood, he is descending towards earth sooner than Abel. And Abel comes, shall we say, into the astral realm, where Cain is probably already in the etheric realm. And, both of them are absorbing some of earth, which will lead to what we call the solid element, but it's not solid yet. It's airy element. They're airy beings. So Cain, though, by being deeper incarnated, and Steiner refers to the male body as being more deeply incarnated than the female body, which is less or more lifted above a certain incarnation, physical incarnation level. So you can see in this that the Cain is a kind of precursor for what will become the male, and the Abel a precursor for what will become the female. But we actually have at this point then 4 lineages. And when the moon is withdrawn, by Yahweh, and that's a whole nother story. This is a very important moment in Earth evolution, that the moon was withdrawn. And this has to do with saving humanity from what is becoming the 8th sphere. So the moon being withdrawn causes a separation of these 4 streams into male and female. And further, from this astral predominance in the Abel, you have the male Abel stream looking down upon the Cain women and finding them fair. And so they take from them wives, even though God had told them, you don't do that. And out of that union comes the Nephilim and the great corruption of the Atlantean epic, and therefore leading to the need for the deluge, the great flood. So the time of Seth is a time when humanity had reached the point of being able to stand upright. We had gone from airy beings to watery beings like jellyfish to finally being land beings and able to stand up on a surface that wasn't just peat or just a bog, but was actually solid. Then we could stand upright. I'm taking way too long, I'm sorry, but there's a lot to say to get this out. And so Seth is now born to replace Abel, who could no longer procreate because of Cain's action upon the Abel stream. So it's deep mysteries here, but so when we look at the Luke's lineage, it goes back through Seth and not Abel. But Seth came to represent Abel. So there's a bit of confusion perhaps, but I could have also said the Luke represents the stream from Seth, but I'm going to say from Abel to be a little bit more spiritually correct, if I can. So can we go on? I hope that helps, Tish.
Yes. Sure. Peter and Martha May, please.
Peter, you're on mute. You have to unmute. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, there, you moved. Hold on.
He's still there. Go ahead, Peter.
Go ahead.
No, we're not hearing your microphone isn't
You're
turned on.
not muted, but we're not hearing you.
Maybe your mic isn't plugged in.
That's right. Can
There
you
we
hear me
go.
now? Turn on.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
good.
Yeah, continuing that to the twin conversation. There were the two Jesus children, and then that merged, and then later in life, after the Baptist was beheaded, there was another merging that happened, from what I understand. Could you speak of, what's going on there? That, is there like an amalgamation of beings there that was there a second amalgamation? You had this blending of the first two Jesus children, then you have the blending of the two Jesus men that ultimately, that's when his ministry began in earnest. Do you have any comment on that, Andrew?
Yeah, Peter, I think what in anthroposophy we would say this second merger is John the Baptist who was beheaded and Lazarus who was being initiated. And so this merger of these two, so that Lazarus, after his initiation, after he's been dead for 3.5 days and called forth, Lazarus come forth, he takes on the name John. And so your point is very good, but what I would say is the merger before is the Cain and Abel or Cain and Seth streams. After Christ was here as a human being, we now have the first merger in the Christian era, and that's John the Baptist and John, John the Evangelist, but who was Lazarus. I don't know, Peter, which two Jesus men do you mean?
Well, we're involved with Mark right now, studying the lectures of, Steiner on Mark, and there's this conversation that when John left, went to the other side, the followers of John immediately went to become the followers of Christ, and it was like this seamless transition between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And John, who was Lazarus, is John the Lazarus the same as John the Baptist?
No,
Right.
they're
Right.
two individuals, but this is the merger I'm referring to
Yeah.
that all of us can do. This is a future kind of merging that we will be able to do.
Okay. Something came to mind. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for the question, though, Peter.
Yeah,
So
Dan and Gridley.
Ridley.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That was quite revealing. We know from Rudolf Steiner about the two Jesus boys merging. What is not having been raised in the Catholic Church, could you enlighten us a little bit on what the traditional teaching is and how they deal with that phenomenon? Obviously, in ways it might be different from the anthroposophical way.
Well, I'm not Catholic either. I was raised my ancestors came over on the Mayflower, and all my family were ministers of the Protestant faith. So, but as I understand it, um, uh, and I tried to indicate this, that during this period from around 325 on, there was an intention in the Roman Empire to look back at the birth, to try to make the birth important. And again, this is part of the materialism of the time. When does a person begin? At birth, and you have your rights from birth. So these, what was considered a sort of unimportant part of Christianity became an important part. And somehow they realized these two stories are different, but they've got the same name, Jesus and Mary and Joseph. So it's going to be a lot easier for us to bring about Christ being born in the manger if we merge those two stories. So even though you can, so I think what's happened is essentially the Luke story was deemed to be the 25th of December, and the Matthew story must have come later in early January. So the kings are arriving later after Jesus had already been circumcised or something.
So there weren't two boys. There were two stories about one boy. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
that's what the Catholics would say today.
Mhm. Thank you.
Two stories of one child, correct.
Don,
Hi,
Hi, Don.
how you doing, Andrew? Thank you. And fast question. We got a long-running feud between Catholicism and the other Christian faiths in the West versus Orthodox Christianity.
Right.
What was the cause of that? And I think the Orthodox is more accepting of the two children. From my research, anyway.
That could have played a role, but what historians say is the filioque, Filiquo. So the filioque was, did the Holy Spirit come from just the Father or from both the Father and the Son? So the sense is that the Holy Spirit was sent from the Father to Mary in Luke and was sent by Jesus to the disciples for Pentecost. And that created a debate. Does the Holy Spirit, can the Son also send the Holy Spirit or just the Father?
Thank you.
And of course, there were probably a dozen other issues that may or may never have been solved. I mean, there's also the Nestorian Christians. I didn't even mention them. And the Manichaeans, who, at one point, there were more Manichaeans than there were Roman Catholics. There were, Nestorians all across the Middle East and into India and all. There was, and Uzbekistan and these places today. And all of that's lost. People don't know of the spread of Christianity in those early centuries. Just remarkable what happened.
before we take Ted's question, do any of these branches of Christianity directly mention the Bethlehem Nazareth question, or do they just point elsewhere?
They point to Easter. Yeah. Hilda's got the first question, I think.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're still on mute. You pressed it, but there you go. No, you're still on mute.
No, I asked you to unmute.
Okay, done
There we
it.
go.
Now we got it. Go ahead.
Okay, just a sec. I heard you say that there was a sealing off of the spiritual world in 1250.
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes.
Well, I'd like to understand why. I believe it's Rudolf Steiner who says that during these 13 nights, these holy nights, from December the 24th to January 6th, the spiritual world is open.
Yes.
So,
Mhm. So it was closed, but then comes Christian Rosenkreuz and others too. But it's now not a given. It's what we have to experience is a world in which the spiritual world has withdrawn. We experience the wrought works of the spiritual world. And so what Christian Rosenkreuz did for us is to give us a new way, not a reception, but a striving into the spiritual world. So he reopened it in that sense. And then comes the end of Kali Yuga in 1899. And now any human, not just a human who has been specially trained, any human can now cross the threshold, which is a very dangerous time, of course, for any human to be able to cross the threshold. And people do with the help of drugs.
Go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, I'm wondering whether you can verify what I'm guessing at. The church obviously knows a lot of esoteric things like reincarnation and so on. My guess is that it was sort of suppressed. Was it done because man could attain freedom in a sense?
I would say yes. It's very interesting. How could somebody in those times stop this knowledge? Isn't that a sin or some kind, and I think there were high initiates who could foresee what needed to happen and knew that this, so I hope I don't offend anybody, but when we went from geocentric to geocentric to heliocentric, Mercury and Venus were swapped. Just look at the pictures, the diagrams from those olden days, and you got Luna, then Mercury, then Venus, then Sun. We find that in the days of the week. We alternate in the days of the week from inner planet to outer planet. So we start with Moon, Monday, Tuesday, Mars, Wednesday, Mercury, Friday, Venus. So, and when we read Steiner about what we experience after death, it's the moon sphere, the Mercury sphere, the Venus sphere, then the sun sphere. So I take that very literally. I know other astrologers do not. They keep Venus and Mercury as astrology does today and as astronomy does today. I don't. I think for astrosophy to work, it needs to swap those planets when we are observing them in the sky. So I think that was done for the same reason you're bringing up, Ted, to bring about freedom, because astrology at the time had become way too powerful. It was fatalistic to hear that this is going to happen. And so, okay, that's how it's going to be. I shouldn't do that, or I should go do that. There was no freedom anymore. And I think great wisdom, even if the people didn't know it, was happening in those decisions to seal off astrology and to seal off reincarnation. Even though they knew it, the man born blind is an example. When the disciples ask, is he blind because he sinned? Because he's born blind. So it must have been in his previous life that they knew about, or his parents' sin. Which one caused him to be blind? And Christ said, in this example, we don't have to consider either of those. It's for what's going to happen, the glory, the revelation of God. I hope that helps, Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That was a good one. Wow.
Andrew, maybe just a quick comment, but
Hi, Gordon. Yeah.
hi, and thanks so much. So rich as always. It's going to be a digestion problem here, but anyway, the importance of art to communicate in history and to see this, as you put it, this story being revealed in plain sight is such a wonderful, wonderful image. It suggests detective work to sort of figure this all out. I'd just be curious if you could comment a little bit about, very shortly, but about your journey in putting that picture together, because it's really a wonderful picture. What Leonardo and his school were capable of doing at that time to avoid the Inquisition. It's just, yes.
Well, I'll try to make it really short, but it's going to be very difficult.
Okay.
And that is, the first thing I heard about Rudolf Steiner was from a girlfriend who was spending the night with me. And she was reading Man in the World in the Light of Anthroposophy by Stuart Easton.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working for IBM, and I had my first big moment the next day. I was to be presenting to a very high staff of the company of the work I had been doing with a simulation model and its results and blah, blah, blah. At 2:00 in the morning, she wakes me up. You got to hear this. You got to hear this. Shaking me in bed. And I'm like, what? And she goes, there wasn't just one Jesus. There were two. And I told her, I want nothing to do with this anthroposophy. Please don't ever bring it up again. And about 4 months later, she said, I want to go to this nutrition conference in this town called Spring Valley. And I can't drive there. I'm not a good driver. I don't have a car. Can you drive me? And I said, of course not. I'm not going to go to anything anthroposophic. What am I going to do all day? And so she ended up convincing me to go. It was a conference on nutrition up in the auditorium there in Spring Valley. And below, they had this bookstore. And I went into the bookstore to try to find something to prove to her how absurd this anthroposophy was. I mean, all I had to do was look at how all the women were dressed. And I could say, this is a sect. This is ridiculous. Ted knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, and I saw these books and they were like $10 a book. And I'm not going to give these people $10. And I found this little booklet, 2 lectures called On the True Nature of the Second Coming. And it was only 99 cents. So I bought this. And it was through this book that I was totally sold on the Christology. It took me another 15 years to buy in on the science because I was trained as a scientist. Okay, but that was a long process to overcome my materialism. And I can't say it's completely gone. You know, I'm still a materialist at heart. But I can merge these two at least or something. But this whole Christology question was something I've carried throughout. And then came this question of the 2 Jesus children, again, because that was my introduction to anthroposophy.
Mm-hmm.
And just one other thing, my cousin, so my dad's sister, my aunt's kids, she became one of the top curators of the Met Museum in New York City. And she's a curator of Renaissance art.
Mhm.
So she had a kind of inspiration for me as well to take up Leonardo da Vinci. And so just as I'm reading about his biography, just reading about these things about him from various people like Carmen Baumbach, I suddenly had this revelation. Oh my God, this is about the two Jesus children. I can see it right there. And every step I took after that was just opening up new doors to prove it. So I hope that helps, Gordon. But
That's a wonderful story. Thank you.
thank you for asking. Well,
Yeah.
And I thought because you came from the University of Michigan that Katz was your influence, but
yeah,
no.
And he was my substitute physics teacher on a couple of occasions. And I was looking for it then. I didn't find it then. Even though Arthur Zients was there at the same time. Stephen Usher was there at the same time. And they put up posters on those kiosks, and I just didn't see them. And I lived on Geddes Road one year, but they didn't have the center then on Geddes Road. So otherwise, I might have found it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
So I'll close with the calendar of the soul, and then after that, maybe we could all just, in some way, some small way, signify our appreciation to this marvelous gift from Andrew. Devoted to the Spirit's revelation, I gain the light of cosmic being. Thought power grows and clarifies to give myself to me. And wakening comes forth from thinker's might, my sense of self. Andrew, we're blessed to have you in our midst, and thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
wonderful.
you so much for your clear presentation and
Thank
all
you.
of the love you put into it.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks.
Wonderful, clear. So knowledgeable and with heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
I'm up here in Alaska saying hello to everybody.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
New Year,
too.
Andrew. What a great way to start the year.
Oh, thank you.